Good afternoon, ladies and gents, and welcome to today's webinar looking at Public Service Operational Delivery Officer, specifically the 9717 version. My name's Dom Green. I'm a Technical Advisor for Business at City & Guilds, and I'm joined today by Mandy Slaney, who is the Lead Industry Manager for the Business Skills portfolio here at City & Guilds as well.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, so what we intend to try and achieve today is we're going to give you a bit of an overview, first of all, around the two assessment methods and some insights then from the lead independent endpoint assessors around lessons learned, and a brief look at the support that you can get in the form of documents, etc. There are some quite sort of interesting documents that we've produced for the transfer across from 3817 to 9717. A brief summary to the changes before inviting you to ask any questions. As per normal, if anybody's been on any other webinars that we do, this is being recorded and it will automatically be sent to you via email by the end of the day. And what we'll also do is we will change it into a YouTube link and pop it onto our past webinars page, which is on our qualifications page on the website under business. So you can also access the recording there. And as per normal, if you do have any questions, you'll see that there's a questions pane on your screen. Feel free to write questions throughout the webinar in there. And if we've got time at the end, we'll dedicate some time to answering those questions. Obviously, we might not be able to get through all of them, and some of them we might need to take away to get further clarification on. So what we will do is create a frequently asked questions document, and that will also be uploaded to our qualifications page alongside the recording. Okay, so before endpoint assessment, apprentices must have completed the Level 2 award in Ops Delivery, which is the principles, and they must have completed the Level 3 certificate, which is the advanced side. And they must have also achieved the equivalent to Level 2 functional skills in English and Maths, if they haven't done already. And of course, before Gateway, they must have completed their portfolio of evidence. So 9717 then only has two assessment methods, whereas the 3817 had four. Those two assessment methods then are the work-based project, which also has a presentation and Q&A around that project, and the professional discussion, which is based around the building of the apprentice's portfolio of evidence. Now, just to be aware then that endpoint assessment must be completed within a maximum of 6 months after the apprentice has gone through Gateway, so that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to have a quick look at the work-based projects before moving on to the portfolio. So the work-based projects then it's extremely important that we are aware that the project can only be completed and compiled after the apprentice has gone through the Gateway process. So it's happening after Gateway. The project subject, the title, and the scope of that project must be agreed between all parties, and that must be submitted to us at City & Guilds within that 2 weeks after the Gateway process. Now, what will happen is an IEPA, an independent endpoint assessor, will look at that project proposal, and they will then feed back to the centre to say, yes, you can go ahead with it, it's fit for purpose, or no, it's not. Now, the project, it's super important that the project is not started prior to Gateway or prior to being approved. And if it is thought that the project has been started prior to being approved after Gateway, then it will be almost null and void. So it's really important that you don't start the project until after it's signed off. If for whatever reason the project fails, it's really important that the learner, the apprentice, and the training provider take on board the feedback from the IEPA. What we do tend to see now and again is project proposals failed, and the IEPA feedback not being taken on board, and it's resubmitted, and once again it's failed again. So it's super important then that the IEPA feedback is considered, taken on board, and the project proposal is amended accordingly. The project must be completed within an 18-week period. Now, quite a lot of training providers actually, or rather quite a lot of apprentices actually complete it in a lot shorter time frame, but it must be completed within that 18 weeks as a maximum. The work-based project, although it has a presentation, it also has a project report, and that report should be 2,500 words. And of course, that work-based project and presentation must make sure that it covers all the knowledge, skills, and behaviours in the standard which are assigned to the project, so which are linked to that project. And obviously, within the EPA handbook, you can find all the KSPs there that need to be covered. So as we said, the project can't start until approved by an EPA. If the proposal fails, it must be amended and returned as soon as possible, taking on board the IEPA feedback. So that work-based project itself should cover all the assessment criteria. What it really needs to focus on then is the different analytical development techniques in the workplace, how it identified any gaps or opportunities for further analysis, and essentially how it's engaged with clients, their own organisation, and obviously any other stakeholders. What's really important here is planning, and what we've got to make sure is that you discuss the project requirements and introduce the apprentice to various workflows within the team or wider teams even in the organisation throughout the apprenticeship journey, really, so that it gives them that breadth of ideas and examples. Now, there's nothing to stop you thinking about what that project could be prior to Gateway, but you can't actually do anything about it. By introducing the apprentice and getting them thinking about it early and looking at the various workflows within the organisation, something might just jump out. So make sure that they're aware of what's going to be coming up. Make sure then that the learner knows the assessment criteria that needs to be covered. Obviously, you've got a copy of that within the assessment plan, you've got a copy of that within the EPA pack, and make sure that you've shared that with any apprentice. And once the apprentice has passed Gateway, make sure that you agree that project plan. And essentially, it sounds common sense, but it's got to make sure that it maps across to all the KSBs. It's got to make sure that it's achievable within the time frame. Basically, making sure it's not too big. But of course, at the same time, making sure that that project also provides sufficient evidence to map across those KSPs. And where possible, a piece of work that the team or department can implement. It's really important that it's achievable and that it's realistic. If it's not implemented, why isn't it implemented? But where possible, can it be implemented? Of course, we need to make sure that the apprentices have access to all the resources needed to carry out that project. The apprentices need time to plan, so they need to carry out research activities. So, for example, they need to contact internal and external customers. They might need to carry out interviews if needed, gather data. They need to analyse and write that final report that needs to be submitted. And of course, we're looking at a time frame. So in most cases, the apprentice may only have 8 to 10 weeks to do all that. We know it says longer within that EPA period, but the apprentice needs to be realistic and obviously making sure that they've got time to make any amendments at the end. Obviously, it's simple things like making sure that the apprentice is not going to be on annual leave or holiday during that period. And making sure that the employer is not allocating additional workload really during that time. They need to focus on this project and that should be obviously, as far as the apprenticeship is concerned, the main area of work. As a provider or an employer, read the project report. that the apprentices produced, give constructive feedback, help the apprentice to analyse the project and map those KSPs across to the evidence which can be found in the assessment plan. So a bit of a brief guide there as to what the report of that project could look like. It doesn't have to be followed, but it is a good structure. So you've got an introduction, obviously covering the scope of the project and title, a brief background which would provide a summary of why it's been done, the aims and objectives of the project, what research and methodology is going to take place, including the actual research, what were the outcomes of the project, what are the implications to the business, so the impact of proposals on the business, and what recommendations did the learner come up with. So that's a really important part, proposals for implementation, and then finally, what's happened, what's the conclusion, and the learner needs to summarise that. Has it been a success? And the learner needs to reflect on their own performance as well. Now, within the EPA pack, there are examples of potential project themes. Now, these might not be suitable for every apprentice, but it's well worth looking at them to get an idea. It might be that a completely new project naturally occurs after Gateway, and if so, that would be perfect. There's nothing worse than trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. So, looking at those particular titles, these are just some that have been taken from the EPA pack. There are a few more areas as well that you could look at. So it might be something about process improvement projects, and there's some examples there of such as ways of sharing good practice, how to streamline, maybe the upskilling of staff, training, etc. It could be that the project is delivery of service or communication strategy projects, or matrix working projects, and there are a few more as well in the pack, so please do give that a good look. Now, the work-based project also requires a presentation as well. That obviously is on the project. It's an overview of the project and what's happened. So, for instance, it might be based on the need to solve a work-based problem, to review an aspect of working practice or a new way of working. That presentation itself will only last for 15 minutes, and then there's a 10% discretion on that. So, you're only looking at maximum 16, 17 minutes. So with that in mind, how big does that presentation need to be? If you're looking at a presentation, you're probably looking at 15 slides, a slide a minute. So that's just it doesn't have to be 15, it can be 10, it could be 20, but what we would expect is that the learner obviously practices that presentation, makes sure that they've timed themselves accordingly, and that they've got all their points across within that 15 minutes time allocation. If it goes on for longer, then the IEPA will have to stop the presentation, and of course, the learner will have not got through their slide deck. Once the presentation's finished, there will be a 15-minute Q&A after it, again with a 10% discretion, to confirm competence. So that presentation of 15 minutes plus the Q&A, you need to make sure that if the learner is doing endpoint assessment in the workplace, that obviously they're going to be away from their job role for some time, and it might be that they need cover, so it's something to bear in mind. Now, within the exemplar pack, there is an example project proposal with an example activity, an example project, sorry, and you'll be able to see there, if you can, that it's been mapped to the KSB. So you can see the bullet points in the project scope, and there you can see where specific bullet points map across to, say, K2, S1, B1, etc. That's really good practice, because it also means that you can tick off all the KSBs to make sure that they actually will cover all of the required standard. You can find those on EPA Pro, or you can find them on Smart Screen. And once you register the learner on Smart Screen, you will be able to locate all the exemplar materials to do with the varying assessment methods, not just the project proposal. So The PD. The PD is actually underpinned by the portfolio of evidence. So the portfolio of evidence is the basis of what the PD is on. The portfolio should look at performance. Okay, so different examples of performance will be required that show consistency by the apprentice. It's key here to note that reflective accounts and self-evaluation are not to be used in 9717. So that's a definite and clear change from 3817. So reflective accounts and self-evaluation are not to be used within the portfolio of evidence. The learner needs to make sure that basically state why they've used the evidence and how it meets the standards. You're obviously putting the best in there from the on-programme, so it's why has that particular piece of evidence been selected and how does it cross-reference to the case Bs. And of course it needs to be authenticated by a credible person, so that could be a team leader in the workplace, it could be a manager for instance, and making sure then that obviously it's authenticated, so the manager's signatures, etc. That needs to be in there to authenticate it. Now, it's important as well that a PDP is in there or some form of personal development. So there must be some form of evidence there within that portfolio of evidence to show how personal development's been carried out throughout the on-programme, throughout the whole period. So it might be that the training provider, the manager's appraisals and reviews are put in there, and of course they need to be authenticated as well. Evidence of projects might go in there, obviously not the project from the gateway because that doesn't start till afterwards, but it might be that they've done smaller projects throughout their own programme, so they could go into the portfolio. How they've maybe worked with other teams, shared or obtained new skills, etc. That's all decent evidence to go into that portfolio. Evidence can include written, audio and video formats if you wish. What we would say is be wary of file size. Audio and video obviously tend to be quite large file sizes, and they must be able to be opened by an independent endpoint assessor. So making sure then that they are standard files, so things like MP4s, MP3s. So an audio would be MP3, a video MP4. It needs to be opened by something generic, such as Windows Media Player, for instance. Okay, so the varying types of evidence that can go in to a portfolio. It might be that they look at planning, so how they planned their specific workload, how they looked at targets, how they set the targets, how did they achieve the goals. Personal development records, so that could come from managers' feedback, any CPD that they've done, for instance. They may have created reports or documents throughout their own programme. That might link to areas, for example, to how they responded to customers' needs, how they've solved problems, so they can go into the portfolio. It might be that they've created minutes of meetings with line managers, for instance. Now, it's got to come from them, so it's got to be their evidence. There's no point putting in minutes of meetings that someone else has written, for instance. It doesn't link to the apprentice, so it must be their evidence. It must be, I did this and I did that, not we did this as a team. It's very much a case of the evidence needs to be the learner's own. So basically, if there's ever a time that they need to show how good they are and show themselves off to say how good they are, what they've done and how they've met those KPIs, it's in the portfolio. So it could also include customer interaction. That can be either internal or external. It might be where they've shared good practice, for instance. That could be formal or informal. And observations can go in there, as can witness testimonies. And where they've used IT. So it might be about filing or retrieving information, archiving, anything like that. Remembering then that reflective accounts cannot go in there. So that's a key area to remember. The structure of the portfolio then. Now this came from a an independent endpoint assessor as to what the portfolio structure could look like. It doesn't have to, but an independent endpoint assessor did forward me this information. So I would say it's a pretty good structure to follow. So it would be a title page, so the learner name, the employer INR number, contents page, the mapping document to the standard, so with the case study and evidence set numbers, and obviously the evidence sets. So what we recommend is that evidence is put into sets, and that those sets often contain a written report, maybe a screenshot, witness testimony, etc. And it might be that those evidence sets there, so you can see those 6 sets of evidence. It could be that one of the sets is dealing with a customer, meeting customer requirements, training and development, etc., etc. So evidence sets is definitely the way forward and what we would recommend to use in the portfolio. Now, the PD is off the back of that portfolio. And the PD is obviously a structured professional discussion between the apprentice and the IEPA. That will last 60 minutes. And again, there's a 10% tolerance above that 60 minutes, should they need. Of course, if learners do require extra time, then that's absolutely fine. But please note that that must be applied for prior to the endpoint assessment. Now, the PD is there to confirm competence, to confirm understanding, to confirm the learner understands the knowledge, skills and behaviours linked to the portfolio. If that 60 minutes is up with that 10% tolerance, so 66 minutes is up, the IEPA will stop the professional discussion. So there is a little time limitation on it to remain consistent throughout. There is no merit, so it's a distinction, pass or fail for this particular EPA. And of course, the apprentices must pass both the assessment methods. They are equally weighted at 50% each. In order to get a pass, they must achieve both. And in order to get a distinction, then the apprentice must achieve the distinctions as well in both assessment methods overall. Now, I'm just going to go through now some feedback from the lead independent assessors on what they see generally throughout showcase portfolios and projects. So it's important to note here that the pass descriptor says a pass grade is an indicator there were aspects of the standards and evidence in respects to quality, range, selection and depth, which could have been developed further. So that's for pass. So key areas where this is the case: customer service. Why learners are not achieving a distinction grade then is that there needs to be a clearer understanding of internal and external customers. Now, we appreciate that there is a challenge with telephones, but the apprentice has to provide compelling evidence that the customer is the focus of everything that they do. They need to show how they provide customer service to the most in need and vulnerable. And quite often that's not coming across sufficiently, so they're only achieving that pass. So it's definitely a key area to focus on that could be improved throughout. So managers' evidence must also be verifiable. So the names and signatures of those managers, and including the roles of what they do, etc., shouldn't be removed. So they need to be on there. What we also see now and again is the changing of the descriptor wording. So what learners tend to do now and again is they will take that description of a particular area of the assessment plan. So this is 2.2, and they will simply tweak it to try and prove that they've mapped it across. So what, for instance, there, 2.2, that's an old one, 2.2, but I work on the telephones giving support to a diverse range of customers who come from different communities of different needs, rights and expectations. And all they've done is taken the criteria 2.2 and tweaked it. So understanding the diverse range of customers and communities, etc. So they haven't actually proved that they work on the telephones there. All they've done is tweak the wording to say that they do. So it's not been contextualized at all. Now, why are learners not achieving a distinction grade in the project? So it must show the actual impact that it's had, whether or not it's the actual impact, or the perceived impact of that particular project. How that impacts the customers directly. Those customers, remember, can be internal and external, and often what the leapers are finding then is that that is a particular weak area in respect to the external customers. So making sure that the apprentice shows the impact that their project will have on both internal and external customers, with an emphasis on the external. Now, obviously, the apprentice will have carried out research, and that research needs to be in that project. That research can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, it needs to be shown. Other types of research must be explained. So, for instance, a review of specific policies, if that or procedures, if that's happened, then that needs to go in there, but it needs to say why it's in there and what it's being used for. And when decisions have been made, what's the reasons behind those decisions, and what other options could have happened, and why were they rejected or accepted? So say why what happened did, and why what didn't happen didn't. And planning, IEPAs and LEAPers have often found that the planning is quite weak. So planning needs to go in there, as it should, it's a project, and making sure that the project plan allows for that. Quite often planning is very much a weak area from the learner. The apprentice's job role is obviously a key important factor. If that job role is limited, and quite often it is, so especially during COVID times, it's important that the employer allows for the apprentice to be carouselled around the organisation where possible. Essentially, this will give the learner expertise in different areas, in different customers, hopefully not just on the phone. When we do go back to the norm, whatever that norm might be, hopefully that would be face-to-face as well, if the job role allows. And also it gets them further experience doing different tasks, and maybe to take part in different teams and different work streams, etc. Now, the projects do not have to be relevant to the role of the job of the apprentice, but it's obviously better if it is. So making sure then that that project is linking to the knowledge, skills and behaviours, and where the project is relevant, it's easy to do that. What IEPAs are finding is that where they're not relevant to the apprentice's job role, it's a lot harder to map across to the KSBs. And then legislation, policy and procedure is weak. It might be that the apprentice can name them, can reel them off, but actually they can't contextualise them and say how it impacts the organisation, how it impacts their job role, for instance. So essentially, it's been mentioned, but it's not been contextualised sufficiently. Now, we have lots of documents to support, and one of the new documents that you may have seen or may not have seen is the mapping guidance from 3817 to 9717. So version 1, 3817 to version 2, 9717, there is a mapping document available there. It's from that link. You can click on that link and it will take you to our EPA, to our City and Guilds webpage, and on that link you will find all the endpoint assessment packs, all the recording form documents for centres, and the mapping guidance as well. Now that mapping guidance, what it does is it shows the difference between the various assessment methods, and we need to be careful because some of the assessment methods have been mapped slightly different. So some of the KSBs have moved, they've also been changed, so they're no longer numbers. They are now letters and numbers, so K1, S2, etc., rather than 2.2. Generally, it's a straightforward document. or the document is straightforward, sorry, but generally it's straightforward to follow, but there are some little tweaks. It's well worth looking at that particular document. Now, I showed you previously a project proposal exemplar, which can be found on EPA Pro and also on Smart Screen under the EPA Preparation tab. There's plenty more as well. So you can see there some screenshots of portfolio guidance, presentation of work-based projects, how to prepare for the Q&A, etc., guidance for the tutor around professional discussions, and guidance for work-based projects. Now, there's also guidance on there for the apprentice as well. So you can download the apprentice versions and give the apprentice their own copy. So guidance for both tutor and for apprentice. So, in summary then, with regard to assessment 1, the EPA procedure follows a similar format to 3817, but the IEPA is in control of the PD, the professional discussion, and will use the questions selected, which have been generated off the back of the portfolio, and they might ask further questions as well to clarify their responses. So remembering then that the professional discussion is based off the back of the portfolio. That's 60 minutes. Now, the 2 assessment processes in 9717 rather than 4 in 3817, remembering that they're both equally weighted. That's exactly the same way. The gateway process is managed by the EPA team as before, but the first change is that project approval, and we've got to make sure that that project is approved before any work on that project can go ahead. If it's failed, then obviously you need to make sure that the feedback is taken into consideration and amended and put back forward. So that needs to come back in as soon as possible. So as soon as it fails, it needs amending. It needs to come back into the EPA team as soon as possible so the IEPA can accept or reject again. Remembering then that the apprentice will commence the project after Gateway once that approval has been given. The showcase portfolio is now a portfolio of evidence, so it's no longer called a showcase portfolio. The portfolio has the allocated case Bs, which is slightly different from 3817. Previously, the showcase portfolio covered all of them, so now they don't. So you need to look at that mapping document to see where they map across, as well as the EPA pack. So the portfolio is reviewed as it was before, to consider how the case Bs are met, followed by then the PD that I mentioned. So the project is not reviewed to give a grade, but is reviewed to identify questions. So that's a key area to look out for. The project is supported by a presentation within the second part of the assessment, and then the questions asked ensures that the KSBs are covered and that confirming full competency. And finally, remembering not to include reflective accounts in that portfolio. Okay. What we're going to do now is open up to any Q&A. We have got a bit of time, so bear with me a minute while I pull out the pane to have a look at the Q&A. Okay, we have a couple of questions around sound. I'm hoping that you can hear me and that I've not talked to myself for the last 35 minutes. Okay, so on EPA Pro, this is a question from Maria. On the EPA Pro Gateway, why is it now necessary to upload the project proposal? This was previously, that's actually changed, Maria. So the project proposal actually needs to be uploaded at Gateway. It used to be, you're quite right, it used to be within 10 working days after Gateway. My apologies. Since the introduction of EPA Pro, the project proposal must go in at Gateway. But you are quite right, it did used to be 10 days after. I'll look at some more. Jackie said, please could you go back to the portfolio slide where it shows categories for each example? I missed 5 and 6. Bear with me a minute. I don't know if you're referring to evidence types there, Jackie, or the guidance. So that there is evidence types there. So what can go in it, what can't go in it. So the difference. It's otherwise it's time consuming for the IEPA to listen to an audio recording and not know where the evidence is. So what I would do is make sure that they are time stamped accordingly. I don't know if that was the slide you were after or that one. Either way, I'll leave that one up for a little bit. Let's have a look if there's any other questions. We've just had a question through now about what is smart screen, so I'll go through that in a minute, Francoise. So there is some exemplar stuff on projects, but Sam, if you want to get in touch, I do have a slide deck or certainly some information on guidance for managers that I could support you with. So I'm more than happy to do that. Smart Screen then is a platform that holds resources for various qualifications and apprenticeships. So on Smart Screen works in 2 ways. Smart Screen is essentially, you can purchase resources there to support you with the various qualifications and apprenticeships. There's also, which obviously comes in various packages depending on what you want. There's schemes of work, there's lesson plans, there's PowerPoint presentations, activity sheets, etc., etc. There's also a free version of endpoint assessment preparation, and that is available once you register a learner. You then get access to Smart Screen. Now, in actual fact, everything that you get access to on Smart Screen has now been transferred across to EPA Pro as well. But on there, on Smart Screen, there is a tab called EPA Preparation, and it's where all the exemplar materials that I showed screenshots of are stored. So all the stuff for tutors and all the exemplars for the apprentices as well, and they can be downloaded and they can be uploaded as well to various platforms such as Moodle, etc. Whatever, Blackboard, whatever you use. They can be downloaded and uploaded. Okay. Sam, you say you can't access the PSODO on Smart Screen for some reason. If that's the case, it might be that you I don't know if you've registered your learners already, but if you can access EPA Pro, like I said, everything has been duplicated onto EPA Pro. EPA Pro is the way forward. For us, it's going to be our one-stop platform for booking, accessing resources, EPA packs, etc. The good thing about EPA Pro is any of the EPA packs that you access are not password protected, so you can simply open them. That's because you need a login to get into EPA Pro. If you went on to any certain standards and certain qualifications have password protected EPA resources, not necessarily EPA packs actually. And if you go through Smart Screen or through the website, sometimes you need to enter a password. On EPA Pro, they are not password protected, so you can simply access them as you wish. So Sam, what I would suggest you do if you can't access Smart Screen is try going through EPA Pro, because that there is a one-stop shop, like I said, where you can access everything all at once. Okay. Laura says, if a learner fails to complete their EPA within 6 months from Gateway, doesn't actually finish off what happens? That's something we would have to address on an individual basis. It might mean that we have to go to the auditory bodies to request what we do next. Very much out of our hands, but what we would do is work with you and the auditory bodies to try and find a resolution for you there. So the idea is that they will finish within that 6-month period. Obviously, there's always extenuating circumstances, and we need to look at those on an individual basis. How do you get access to EPA Pro? Thanks, Nadia. Now, EPA Pro is given access. You probably find that EPA Pro is in stages. So you have a primary user and a secondary user. And what you'll find is probably somebody within your exams department, for instance, or something like, will have access to EPA Pro, and they'll be classed as your primary user. And what they can do is set up anybody who needs access as a secondary user. So it might be that teachers, coaches, assessors, etc., are registered as a secondary user, and you can then access the EPA Pro documents. So what I would do there, Nadia, is go back to try and find out who your primary user is. Normally it's the person who makes the bookings for the learners, and get them to set you up as a secondary user. There is an EPA Pro manual available, so that can support the primary user in setting you up as a secondary user. Now, just going back to Smart Screen. Smart Screen, because I did mention that it works in two ways. Part of Smart Screen is purchasable. So part of Smart Screen is free, so the EPA preparation stuff is free, but the other worksheets, slide decks, presentations, activity sheets, all those, they are purchasable. And what we also have is Smart Screen and Smart Screen, which also incorporates video, audio, etc. So if anybody is interested in looking at Smart Screen to get those lesson plans, schemes of work, etc., please do get in touch, and I can forward you your query onto the relevant business manager to show you what's available on there, and to maybe go through it with you. Just looking now, any other questions? Jackie's come back saying it was the numerical list, 1, customer complaint, 2, meeting a customer's needs, etc. Right, let's see if we can find that. There we go. So hopefully that helps, Jackie. Now, these City and Guilds webpage alongside the recording of this particular webinar, and frequently asked questions as well. So I'll type up the questions here. Have a look if there's any more questions. A reflective account and get City and Guilds definition. And that is it for questions. So you don't have to stop there. Sorry, Janice has just put another one in. What is the difference between main and secondary users? Janice, I'm not sure actually about that. I think it's the amount of register, etc., and the secondary is maybe read access, clutching at straws, available on the website. So it's probably worth not giving you enough information rather. Okay, so what I'll do is I will stop the webinar there. I'll record it, download it, pop it on the website. You will automatically get a recording of the webinar via email. As well, I'll type up the frequently asked questions, and if there's anything else that you want from me, and it's very much closed questions there, I'd very much appreciate the last question, which basically says how, if you fill out that and across the customer, try and tailor any further support to specific areas down further into manage, for instance, or it might be that you want to drill down further into the professional discussion, etc. So if you fill out that form, that would be really beneficial to us, so that we can continue to keep in specific areas that you require. Today, form that you will get a link to this afternoon. Thanks very much for your time, much appreciated. And if you do need to email me at all, it's dominic.green@cityandguilds.com. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.